I'm Megan, and thank you for being here with me for what should be a very practical 5-part series. It's Somatic Yoga Shorts on finding and strengthening the 4 deep core muscles. This first video is foundational. You want to make sure that you are familiar with your Transversus Abdominis, that you can feel those, and this will help you to do that. There's that corset of muscles and your abdomen that wraps around to your waist. From now on, I'll call them the TVAs. And also the pelvic floor, which is another one of the 4 deep core muscles. The pelvic floor is in a diamond shape. The front of the pelvic floor would be where your pubis is. The back is the anus, otherwise known as the pee-pee and the poo-poo. And then the 2 sides would be your 2 sits bones. So we're going to get started on the ground and see what we can find with the position of the pelvis and how that helps to determine what muscles are supporting us in these deep core areas. So taking your feet to the ground, just take a moment to land and locate in your pelvis. Notice, does one hip feel heavier or lighter? Can you sense where your tailbone is? Is it touching the ground? Is it lifting away from the ground? Do you feel any sort of arch underneath the low back, or is the low back flush with the floor? Letting the rest of the spine just find the ground and relax. And begin to draw your legs in towards your body. Notice as you do that how the weight will shift into the low back, the tailbone will lift up, so changing the shape of the pelvis. And then go ahead and draw them all the way in as tight as you can. Draw the legs in. Notice how with the legs drawn in, the low back is long, and there's a sense of compression in the abdomen. So what we'll find when we're doing these movements is we don't want the tailbone lifting, but we do want the low back longer in order to engage the TVAs and the pelvic floor. They're twins and they work together. So now let's do the opposite. Drop the knees slightly away from you. And notice how as you do that, your low back will start to arch or come away from the floor. You can even slide your hands underneath there. So in this position, the low back is tightening or shortening, and the abdomen might feel a little bit of a stretch. So the abdomen and the pelvic floor are stretching when we're in this arch, what we call the anterior arch of the pelvis. And then you can also just feel the sides of your pelvis. Let your legs fall to the left. Notice the left hip. Let the legs fall to the right. Notice the right hip. And just make some playful circles if you'd like. Let your head roll. Just become familiar with the space of the back of the pelvis on the ground, your tailbone, the low back. And then place your feet on the floor. Take a big full body stretch. I call it a full body yawn. And notice now you'll really probably get that big arch. The belly will pop up like it's feeling like a balloon. The back will arch even further. So in this position, it makes it almost impossible to engage these abdominal muscles and your pelvic floor muscles. There's that arch again. We're going to play with this one other way to feel into our pelvis. Go ahead and draw your legs back. Let the back and spine relax, feet to the floor. Slide your hands underneath the low back. Begin to slowly tiptoe the feet away from your buttocks. And as you do that, notice when it is, where it is, that your low back starts to arch away from the floor. You feel that sense of tightness or shortness in the low back. You might feel the belly creeping up towards the sky and expanding, the stretch around the navel center. So we're just feeling that. So this again is the anterior tilt, not where we want to be when we want to strengthen the TVAs and the pelvic floor. Now begin to walk your feet back. Keep coming back towards your buttocks, just little steps, keep your hands there. And walk the heels really close to your buttocks until you sense that it feels like your low back is actually pushing into the floor, maybe even your low ribs. It might feel like your tailbone starts to lift slightly. And here we can sense the way the back of the pelvis and the low back are long, and there's almost like a shortening. If you had a spring, it's tightening from the front of the pubis to the navel center and from left hip to right hip, like a drawstring feeling in this low abdomen. So this is where we're able to engage the TVAs and the pelvic floor, but we can do so with a little more release by just letting the tailbone come down. So now we're going to find movement through that. Place your hands on your abdomen. And we're going to start with the softening of the belly and the shortening of the low back. Begin to breathe into the belly. And as we breathe in, the abdomen rises and fills. Imagine it like that balloon. Let the abdomen rise up on your inhalation and lift the low back into the arch that we found when we walked our feet out. As you breathe out, just let the low back land. Let the abdomen soften towards the spine. So focus on that full deep inhale into the belly, like it's lifting or levitating the back off the floor. And breathe out, come back down. You can feel yourself from the front of the body and also from the back. Sense the way you're rolling from the top of your pelvis on the exhale towards the tailbone at the top of the inhale. Just sensing that rolling through the back. Maybe start to find a small pause at the top of your inhalation where you can really sense the way the whole abdomen is expanded from the navel center to the pubis and the two hips, but also the way the low back is short and tight, compressed or contracted. And if we have back pain or discomfort, a lot of times, unfortunately, this is what goes on, is this back is holding tight and the abdominal muscles are not supporting. Let that go on your exhale. Take one or two more, just coming to the top of the inhale, and just a small pause to feel. Feel the way the weight goes into the tailbone, and the ease with which you can just let it drop on the exhale. Now let's find the other direction where we're able to engage the abdominal wall. We're working on that first, the TVAs, the pelvic floor will be second. So now find your exhalation. You can keep your hands on your belly if that's helpful, or you can also put your hands underneath your low back. As you breathe out, gently press the low back and low ribs into the ground, maybe even lift the tailbone slightly. Imagine drawing the pubic bone towards the navel center, so that cinching is happening. And as you inhale, just release. So exhaling, pressing low back, low ribs down. And inhaling, releasing. Now notice the movement on the pelvis. We're going from being centered to bringing the weight into the waist as the tailbone lifts. And it's that position where we can engage these TVAs. So on the exhale, notice the bottom of the exhale where you feel empty. And gently hold, just for a moment, a small pause. And inhale, release. Do that again, pausing. And so where we have this natural occurrence with the breath and the movement to feel the expansion of the abdomen, so front side expands, back side contracts on the inhale, and then on the exhale, the back side lengthens, that should feel good, and the front side contracts. That's the natural occurrence. Let's take that a little bit further. And I'm going to move my hands out of the way. On the exhalation, purposely draw the navel center and the low abdomen towards the spine. See if you can feel a little more action, and then small pause at the bottom of the exhale. Inhale, come into the arch, stretch the belly, lift the low back. Exhale, draw in. So a more purposeful contraction in that abdominal area. It might be helpful to lift the tailbone slightly, or it might feel better to push down into the low back and low ribs. The two ways to create force in the body, or this muscular engagement, are to push into the ground or pull away from the ground. So pushing into the ground with low back, low ribs, and or pulling away from the ground with the tailbone. But you're still locating yourself through the whole circumference of the pelvis, but sensing that tightening through the abdomen. And then the releasing on the inhale. This is the full pelvic tilt. When we feel free in this movement and it's more organic, you might sense that your neck and your head are moving too, because truly this is a tail to tongue movement. And what happens as the front body stretches and expands on the inhale, the back of the neck lengthens, or if we think of the primary curves, the low back on inhale is shortening and tightening. The neck is lengthening. And then on the exhale, the low back is lengthening and the neck is arching or shortening. So those two primary curves are doing the opposite. You can just continue to feel yourself through the pelvis, particularly that front area, that corset of muscles. Can you let them stretch and open and expand? Feel your skin stretch across the whole of the belly on the inhale and draw them in like a suction on the exhale. Take just a few more. As I mentioned, we're going to want to know where it is that we can sense this active engagement in the TVAs, because in order to strengthen them, we have to know that we're there first to find and facilitate this, what should be a natural movement, because the 4 deep core are meant to anticipate our movement. Somewhere along the way, they forget to do that. So we're just helping them out. Now let's focus more on the pelvic floor. Pause for a moment, be still. Check to see we're still in what we call constructive rest. So the knees, the ankles, and the hips are in the straight line. And I haven't walked my feet too far forward to where my back is arching, but I also don't want my feet too close to my buttocks to where I'm pressing into the floor. So just that natural curve. Sense the pelvic floor. So think of that diamond shape from the front to the back and the two sides. And now as you arch, I want you to feel the pinky toe sides of your feet and let your knees drop open. So we're going to keep the feet as wide as the hips. But what's happening here is the low back is arching and tightening, the belly is stretching, the inner thighs are stretching along with the belly. The stretching of the inner thighs encourages that pelvic floor to stretch, or what it does is flatten and stretch forward towards your toes, I guess is how you can picture it. And now as you exhale, we're still going to press low back, low ribs into the ground. You can draw your navel center in, but hug the thighs back together. So at the bottom of the exhale, the inner line of the legs is engaged, encouraging the pelvic floor to draw upward. It tractions back towards the navel center. Sometimes lifting the tailbone a little bit will help you to feel that. And as mentioned, these are twin muscles. The TVAs and the pelvic floor work together. So inhalation, pelvic floor, TVAs stretching, low back arching and tightening. Exhale, pelvic floor and TVAs, both shortening, contracting, engaging. And I do have an entire series just on pelvic floor. If this is not working for you, there's other tricks that we do. But see if you can feel, I think of it like a flower. The flower is opening on the inhale and closing back up on the exhale. So the pelvic floor is often overlooked. Nobody wants to talk about it, but super important part of our deep core muscles that support us, that inter-abdominal pressure that we receive. It holds all our organs in, right? So just enjoy this now. Take a few more, and you can play with the feeling of the back of your pelvis feeling the ground, the shape of the pelvis and where it's pressing, how your tailbone responds, how your low back responds. Where do you feel stretching in the body? Where do you feel contraction in the body? So one of the most basic movements we do right here. Feel free to take a few more. And are you getting that sense of contraction of the inner line of the legs through the pelvic floor, the lower abdomen? At the bottom of the exhale, you can even pause there for a moment. And that stretching at the top of the inhale, the abdomen, pelvic floor, inner thighs. So can you feel movement? If you think of your abdomen or your pelvic floor, just like your fist, it's like there's this sense of inhaling and opening the fist, exhale and closing. Same movement. We never want to live in a state of expansion, and we never want to live in a state of contraction. We want to move. That's the healing that occurs when we can move muscles through their whole range of motion at will. When you're done, feel free to hug your knees into your chest. Roll around a little bit more if you'd like. Thank you for joining me for this first part of the 5-part series on the deep core muscles, particularly to my Patreons who will be getting an extra video of all 5 practices put together in one long practice. Thank you for your support. Additionally, for my patrons who sponsor me at the $15 level, and if you'd like to join me, you can receive PDFs of the movements we do in these 5 videos. If you're more of a learner from pictures and words, it can be helpful, or if you're a yoga teacher and it's something you want to teach your students. Either way, thank you all for your support, and I hope to see you again next week. Peace, joy, love, and light.